Hello, everyone. My name is Joed, and welcome to the first part of this three-part retreat workshop, Relationship Detox, Practicing Curiosity, Courage, and Compassion to Nurture Life-Giving Relationships. This is brought to you by Millennial Tito Monk and YGoal Inc. Millennial Tito Monk creates content and resources related to spirituality and transpersonal psychology. And these are not limited to any particular faith tradition. This project introduces and hopefully inspires people to explore various spiritual practices that are suitable for them in their own context. In future, Millennial Tito Monk aims to offer a program for everyone who wishes to live a contemplative life through integrative practices. More about that towards the end of this retreat. So this retreat workshop is going to have three parts. And this is mainly an effort to examine and reflect on the relationships that you already have at this time, all hundreds and hundreds of them, and how we can practice the three C's: curiosity, courage, and compassion. At the very core of this activity is its being a retreat, meaning a sacred time for you wherever you are, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. You can take this experience as deep as you are being led to. The most important commitment you are making for this retreat workshop is your commitment to yourself. Let us start with a few moments of silence, contemplating briefly on this question. What are my deep desires at this very moment? If you have your journal with you, which I hope you will keep beside you throughout this retreat workshop, take time to scribble some words or phrases that come to you. This is an exercise to really check in and be here at this moment. What are my deep desires right now? What am I bringing in this space? If you need more time to write your answer to this question, you can pause this recording and then just resume when you're ready. Keep your answers close to remind you of the deep desires you have. It's good to always be aware of what you're bringing deep in your hearts. What we aim to do in this three-part retreat workshop are straightforward. We want to examine and reflect on the quality of your relationships, appreciate the life-giving ones, and discern on the life-depleting ones. Contemplate on the many ways we can practice the three C's in your relationships. Let's have a rundown on how the three parts would go. Part one begins with a brief presence practice, which will be followed by a short sharing on the transpersonal perspective on relationships. After that, the worksheets that we will be using will be introduced. There will be examples on how the worksheets will be filled out. Blank worksheets as well as reflection guides can be downloaded using links found in the description of this video. Part two will also begin with a brief presence practice. I recommend that you join a small group to do soulful conversations before listening to the input on curiosity, courage, and compassion. If you want to join a small group, please send us a message so we can connect you to others who also want the same. If you prefer to not join a small group, that's fine too. Those who want to organize their own small group and want to follow the Soulful Conversations format, please refer to the instructions on how to do it in the part 2 video. After the brief presence practice and the soulful conversations, there will be a sharing on the three C's: And like part one, a reflection guide will be provided. Part three also starts with a brief presence practice. Like in part two, let us know if you want to be connected to a small group. Otherwise, you can organize your own small group and follow the Soulful Conversations format if you like. This three-part retreat workshop closes with an introduction to integrative practices as an invitation to contemplative living, and then a link will be available for a short evaluation. So that's the overview of the three parts. Now we can get started with part one. We begin with this blessing for presence, written by John O'Donohue. Watch, listen, and read in silence as we immerse in this blessing. May you awaken to the mystery of being here. And enter the quiet of your own presence. May you have joy and peace in the temple of your senses. May you receive great encouragement when new frontiers. May you respond to the call of your gift and find the courage to follow its path. May the flame of anger free you from intensity. May warmth of heart keep your presence aflame and anxiety never leave. May your outer dignity mirror an inner dignity of soul. May time celebrate my therapies that seek human attention. May you be consoled in the secret symmetry of your soul. May you experience each day as a sacred gift woven around the heart of the worthy. Relationships. Let us start by focusing on this word. What thoughts come to you when you hear the word relationships? What feelings arise in you? What sensations manifest in your body? It's good to pay attention to these thoughts, feelings, and sensations. Take note of them in your journal. You might find them helpful when you do the reflections later. When I got the chance to visit the monks in some monasteries earlier this year and saw how quiet their place was, one of the thoughts that came to mind was, good job moving away from your complicated relationships outside the monastery. But that thought was immediately challenged when I interacted with some of them and learned how complicated relationships can be right inside the monasteries. Their relationships with their superiors, with other monks, with nosy tourists like myself. And it made me think, we just cannot escape relationships, no matter how hard we try. We are wired for connection. Come to think of it, we have always been in relationships of every kind from the time we were born. Our very conception was a product of a relationship. Relationships have surrounded us all throughout our lives. They have a big contribution to who we are now and who we will be in the future. There was a time when I enjoyed reading people's bios or profiles in social media. One thing I found interesting was that many of these social media profiles used relationships to describe themselves. Mother, brother, wife, friend, mentor. There are relationships that bring out the best in us. I had lunch with a very close friend recently, and while walking, she told me how she discovered a lot of new things about herself when she became a mother. Her worldview changed. There are new parts of her personality that came out. On the other hand, there are relationships that bring out the worst in us. A few triggers, and then we learn about our tendencies and issues we have not dealt with. Some are lucky that they get to stay away from these kinds of relationships, while some had to endure those difficult relationships every day. Take a moment to examine the way you see the world in general. Somebody I used to accompany shared that for so many years, she used to view the world as a very dangerous place. She would always be on guard because everybody is out to get her. Along her journey, she realized that that worldview was handed down to her by her parents. Her relationships growing up convinced her that the world was not a safe space. It took a lot of courage for her to challenge that worldview and finally free herself from it. What are your dreams and aspirations now? How much of these are shaped by your relationships? Have your relationships encouraged you to pursue your calling in life? Or have your relationships clipped your wings and made you believe you cannot be who you truly are or who you can become? On a spiritual or transpersonal level, relationships influence our connection with the sacred and vice versa. Whether consciously or unconsciously, our parents handed down to us their own images of God, for example. Our family takes care of an old image of La Pieta that has been handed down through the generations. It's the sculpture of Mary holding her son Jesus after he was lowered down from the cross. The image of the dead Jesus used to be the most effective disciplining tool in the family. I remember how my uncles and aunts would tell us to stop running around or obey their orders, otherwise Jesus would be mad at us. Magagalit si Papu, as they would put it. God was portrayed as a man who must not be disturbed, so we better behave well. Do you recall how God was portrayed by your parents when you were growing up? Many of the images of God we inherited from our family are not directly taught to us. Many of them we acquired indirectly and unconsciously through our relationships with our family members. When a child is beaten up or verbally abused by his parents while growing up, he may transfer how he thinks and feels about his parents to God. People who have had more negative and destructive rather than loving and positive relationships with their earthly father or man in a similar role are likely to have considerable negative associations with the term father, which are unconsciously transferred to their perception and approach to God as father and male. How about when a child is emotionally or sexually abused by a religious parent, or one who perhaps actually invokes God in justifying the abuse? The modeling we received and the kind of relationship we had with our parents and primary caregivers become a big part of how we see God. Then there is the God that our church or faith community introduced to us. When I was younger, I thought I had to endure priests who give a tirade of condemnation to sinners during Mass. They claim that God is angry at those who do not follow his commandments. Some church leaders would condemn the LGBTQ community on one hand. On the other hand, Pope Francis would say, "Who am I to judge a gay person?" Some priests would not give communion to couples who are not married in church, saying they are not living uprightly in the eyes of God. How is God portrayed in that? Or when a priest refuses to give communion to non-Catholics because the body and blood of Christ is only for those who are baptized Catholics. Who is God in that picture? The gospel of grace sometimes becomes the gospel of shame. Unfortunately, these distortions get reinforced by going to the same church with the same priest or pastor over and over again. No wonder there are more and more people who identify as SBNR these days. SBNR is an acronym for the spiritual but not religious. These are people who are seeking for a genuine and personal connection with the sacred or with God outside the walls of the church or organized religion. Many turned their backs on religions that turned their backs on them. I read from one spiritual writer, "We become the God we adore." I sat with it long and hard and told myself, that makes total sense. If I believe in a God that is cold and punitive, chances are I will be a reflection of that God in my relationships. If the God I adore is warm and gives unconditional love, it can also be seen in the life I live. And in all of these dynamics, the deepest root of how we relate to the sacred is how our relationships were when we were growing up. So, what kind of relationships do you have at home, at work, among peers, in social media? Are your relationships breathing life in you, or are they taking the life out of you? I guess it's safe to say we have both life-giving and life-depleting relationships. And this retreat is an opportunity to take a closer look at these relationships and sense any possible invitation or call to action. What makes a relationship life-giving? Obviously, only you have the final say on what a life-giving relationship is for you. However, I would like to propose that a life-giving relationship is one that nurtures and supports the growth, well-being, and happiness of both individuals involved. In such a relationship, both parties feel valued, respected, and appreciated for who they are. They're able to communicate openly and honestly with each other without fear of judgment or rejection. There is a sense of trust and safety, and each person feels emotionally secure and supported. Life-giving relationships also involve mutual support, encouragement, and collaboration, as well as the ability to work through challenges and conflicts in a healthy and respectful way. In life-giving relationships, you feel like you belong, and this means you do not have to change any part of you just to be accepted. All parts of you have space in a life-giving relationship. Life-giving relationships connect us to the flow of life. It does not keep you boxed up or tied down, but allows you to take part in how life is moving and unfolding and happening around you. In contrast, what are life-depleting relationships? Again, only you get to say what is life-depleting for you. But generally, a life-depleting relationship can be one that drains the energy, joy, and well-being of one or both individuals involved. In such a relationship, one or both parties may feel undervalued, disrespected, or unappreciated. Communication may be difficult or confrontational, and there may be a lack of trust or emotional safety. Life-depleting relationships may also involve one person being overly critical or controlling, or both parties feeling unsupported or disconnected from each other. In some cases, the relationship may be abusive or involve harmful behaviors, such as emotional or physical violence. If in life-giving relationships we feel like we belong, in life-depleting relationships, we tend to feel that we have to fit in. And in order to do that, to fit in, we need to change ourselves, morph into a totally different person, or distort some parts of us just to be accepted. Life-depleting relationships are stagnant. It prevents you from participating in the flow of life. Life-depleting relationships create divisions and multiply pain. They say that the pain that has not been transformed gets transmitted or transferred to the other. This kind of relationship can make you feel that you are simply not enough. So, gathering all of those together, you know, what relationships are, the life-giving and the life-depleting ones, and how they are all true or not true in your context, in your personal life. We now go to the worksheet part. I would like to make a disclaimer that these worksheets are not intended to be used as an assessment tool. Together with a friend, these worksheets were conceptualized, and with your help, perhaps we can turn this into something useful for more people. There will be two worksheets. The first one is the relationship inventory. So instructions for filling this out will be given as a handout, as a link. So check out the description of this video. So before writing in this worksheet, please take a few minutes of silence to help you prepare for this activity. Remember to answer with authenticity. This worksheet will be for your eyes only, so give your most honest responses. The table has 3 columns. Feel free to use as many pages as you need. You may use any clean sheet of paper as an inventory sheet, as an additional sheet for this. Now, for a maximum of 15 minutes, list down in the first column all the names of people you have a relationship with. Include personal and professional relationships. Write their nicknames or short names or even codes. In the second column, objectively evaluate your relationship with every person in terms of proximity or physical distance. In a scale of 1 to 9, and decimal points are welcomed, like 1.5 or 2.7. How far or near are you from the person in general or most of the time? 1 being very far, 9 being very near. Again, this is proximity or physical distance. In the third column, objectively evaluate your relationship with every person in terms of quality. In a scale of 1 to 9, decimal points are welcome. How life-draining or life-giving is your relationship with a person in general or most of the time? Again, we acknowledge that relationships are more complex than just assigning them to either life-giving or life-depleting. But for the purpose of this worksheet, I'd invite you to think of the general way that you interact with this person. How life-draining or life-giving is your relationship with the person in general or most of the time. 1 being very life-draining and 9 being very life-giving. Again, in general or most of the time. An important reminder is to not overthink your responses for the proximity and the quality columns. Pay attention to the value that first comes to mind. When you are done, take a break for a few minutes to make space for yourself before you take on the next worksheet. So please do this exercise reflectively. There is no need to rush. This is an example of a filled out worksheet 1. So there are nicknames here, and then the numbers assigned per relationship according to proximity and quality. Now, the second worksheet, the relationship map. So this is taken on after you're finished with worksheet 1. This part entails a little bit of focus and presence. So this worksheet will hopefully allow you to visualize the relationships around you and the quality of those relationships. I hope you find this meaningful. Like in the first worksheet, before starting with this one, please make sure to spend a few moments of silence, remembering that you are in a retreat and this is a sacred time for you. So as you can see, this is a blank plane where you can plot each relationship you enumerated from the worksheet, from the first worksheet. So each relationship has a corresponding pair of numbers. The first number is the rating you gave for proximity, and the second one is the rating you gave for quality. Now go through each person in the first worksheet and then pay attention to the rating that you gave for proximity, which will be plotted out on the horizontal line, far and near. For example, if you gave a rating of 6 for a relationship for proximity, it will correspond to 0.6 along the horizontal line. Now, take a look in the same relationship, find the rating that you gave for quality, and this will be plotted out on the vertical line. Life giving to life depleting. For example, if you gave a rating of 8 for quality, it will correspond to 0.8 along the vertical line. Okay, the exciting part. To determine the exact location of that relationship in the plane, simply find the intersection of the lines, like what you see in the screen. So here is an example of a filled out worksheet 2 coming from the sample worksheet 1 earlier. So as you can see here, Anne, who was rated 1 for proximity and 9 for quality, landed somewhere here. So 1, so more closer to far, and then 9, which is very life-giving. So do that to all the relationships that you have listed in worksheet 1, and you might come up with something like this. Now, this is a way to describe the quadrants in the plane. You will be able to see like a heat map of your relationships. Please note again that we are in no way putting any relationships or persons in a box, especially assigning them simply as being life-giving or life-depleting. We acknowledge that many relationships can be both life-giving and life-depleting for us. So you can see here on this quadrant, on the upper right, are the life-giving relationships within reach. On the upper left, it's life-giving and long-distance relationships. On the lower right are the life-depleting relationships in your immediate environment. And on the lower left are the life-depleting relationships that are far from you. So you will see when you already plotted out all your relationships, see which ones would land in which quadrant here. And then to hopefully make sense of the results of those worksheets, here are some of the questions. The quadrants will be the main focus of the reflection. So it won't really be that meaningful if you won't go through worksheets 1 and 2 before going to the reflection part. Here are some of the questions you might be led to reflect on. How do I feel about how my quadrants look like? Just by looking at the quadrants, how do you feel about them? And what kind of relationships surround me? If you see there can be 2, are there more life-giving relationships surrounding me, or are there more life-depleting relationships surrounding me? How do I nurture my life-giving relationships? So these are the relationships on the upper quadrants. And then what invitations do I sense about the life-depleting ones? The relationships that fell on the 2 lower quadrants. Just a few reminders for your reflection time. Be discerning on how you spend the next hours after listening to this and answering the worksheets. Remember, your commitment is to yourself more than to anybody or anything else. This is your sacred time. Do not try to squeeze out any reflection or insight. We are not here to come up with a quotable quote or a nice thing to say or write on your journals. I invite you to focus more on having a posture of openness, of patiently listening to what is arising in you. This involves listening to the small, still voice in the depths of your heart, paying attention to your inner stirrings. What is really happening in me? How is my body reacting right now? Please resist judging yourself in the process. If your body tells you it needs some rest, go to sleep or take a relaxing walk outside. If you want to be a little bit silly and dance as you do your reflection, let it out. Thinking about doing an artwork, go for it. Resist the temptation of saying no to yourself because you feel you're not good enough or not creative enough or simply not enough. Go ahead and trust the process. Pay attention to invitations. By invitations, I mean the movements you notice as you reflect. If you imagine yourself in a river, letting yourself float, where is the river carrying you? Which direction do you sense you're being led to? An invitation can be a call to action or a call to be still. It can be an invitation to see things in a new perspective or try something new. And since these are invitations, you are free to say yes or no to them. If you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to reach out. If you want to be part of a small group where you can share your reflection and listen to others' reflection too, please contact us so we can find one for you. Thank you and have a meaningful time.